We're gonna dig into this FD Signifier video. I saw it and I knew I needed to watch it. I saw the cover of it because the cover of it. Okay, so the question is, can hip hop ever be radical again? And I have so many opinions about the matter. So many opinions about the matter. And the cover of the video was an arrow at Kendrick, and I think it said almost or something. It either said almost or no. But, you know, that's an ongoing conversation we've been having here on the morning show and on the YouTube channel about what Kendrick's success and what Kendrick's success means given the nature of him as a writer in hip hop and how verbose, how literary he is, how creative he is as a writer. And I imagine this will speak to whether or not Kendrick's success will have an effect on the rest of the industry. And so I'm eager to hear what he has to say.
Recording, I did a talk at SUNY Brockport, which is, by the way, where one Professor Sky teaches hip hop and
Professor
French.
Sky, shout out to
It was
Professor
dope.
Sky.
It was a really good experience. People drove hours to see me, which is like humbling and wild. I'm thankful and appreciative. And it was also just a good time. And it was about hip hop, masculinity, and a bunch of other
Oh my gosh, look at that. Look at that artwork. They picked a very young Kendrick and a particularly jovial Drake. That's interesting.
stuff. But rambling, one question came up about like the true nature of hip hop and who owns it and who is served by hip hop the most. And my answer to that question was basically, sadly, the worst people possible.
Damn, Logan Roy. Damn.
You might think that the recent resurgence of effort and artistic vision ushered on by people like Kendrick Lamar and Doechii means that hip hop is changing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the total reality of hip hop is really any different than what the medium has been for the last 20, 30 years.
And even before he goes into it, I would just say too, if you look at, I hate that I paused him right there. Let me, get him with his eyes open. You don't want to be froze with your eyes half open like that. But I think if you look at the reaction that a lot of people online have to Doechii, I certainly think that her artistry and creative vision is not heralding any particular sea change. I think if anything, her creativity, her difference from the mainstream is sort of off-putting to some people. Or at least they don't seem to be necessarily open to it. And it doesn't seem like a lot of people think that she's genuine in her artistry too, like with all of the industry plant sort of allegations and that nonsense, because that's nonsense, by the way. But yeah, I certainly don't think that Kendrick and Doechii's success heralds a sea change. I just wanted to say that before he probably says it too.
Still very much beholden to corporate interests, and it's very much lost its radical edge that it kind of hasn't had for like 30, 40 years now. I spoke on this back in one of my old videos where I basically said that once Run DMC signed a deal with Adidas, the game was over and corporatism had won hip hop. But at least early on, there was a lot more room for radically political hip hop music that snuck through the door before the corporations fully understood what was happening. You had people like Public Enemy, Rage Against the Machine, but those are few and far between, and even Public Enemy was low-key an accident. There's always been more underground figures then and now who truly represent radical politics. I'm thinking of Mortal Technique and Brother Ali,
Shout out to Brother Ali especially. Bag of Mation asked, who you think is the biggest industry plant? I don't think that industry plants really work anymore. I think they used to work. I don't think that really works anymore. And I think now if you see a successful artist, it's just because a big label chose to invest resources in somebody who was talented in some way that they thought was marketable. I don't really think the industry plant thing exists anymore.
But black. I'm thinking of Mortal Technique and Brother Ali back in the blog era. That's why that sentence is hard to say, because that was not setting myself up for success. I'm thinking of Mortal Technique and Brother Ali back in the blog era. Today, to a minimal extent, maybe you could say JPEG.
JPEG Mafia is what? What? Like radical? JPEG? I don't think so. I would disagree here. I would disagree here.
Mafia, if you stretch a little bit, but I'm
Like, I think JPEG Mafia has politics online sometimes, very, very sporadically. I wouldn't call him political or radical personally.
more impressed with mostly unknown figures in the current hip hop landscape, like Skip Coon and Infinity
Skip
Knives.
Coon's hard. Oh, Skip Coon, man. Skip Coon's hard.
Infinity Knives, in fact, just released their second album. I've talked about them a while back. They're like, basically, what if Death Grips was a bit more accessible, which is good for me, because shout out to Anthony Fantano. I never got into Death Grips. I tried.
Death Grips also was not necessarily for me. I see the appeal though. Like I think I was at Low End Theory when they played once, and I was like, oh, I get it, but it wasn't for me.
It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I couldn't do it. Infinity Knives, though, fucks with them, and they'd probably be more prominent. They probably.
This is not. I'm gonna have to correct him. Infinity Knives is the producer on the left. Brian Ennals is the rapper on the right. They're not. They're a group with both of their names together. Infinity Knives is only one of them.
It'll be a group you know about, if not for the fact that the first track on their new album is a song called Iron Wall, comparing Zionists to Nazis, and by the end of it, they've taken shots at everyone from Barack Obama to Gal Gadot. And that's just the first song, and that's the same type of energy that
Yeah, 388 No Name is a great call. Probably the highest profile, truly political artist, I would say, underneath that Kendrick level. I would say No Name is probably the best example.
I got from Lupe Fiasco 15 years ago when he got on stage and called out Obama for supporting Israel bombing the Gaza Strip, something that low-key cost him his career. I bring this up because this takes balls. This is a little different, and people are going to be mad at me.
Yeah, Run the Jewels is a good call too. And of course Woods is political, but like I don't think that FD Signifier is deep into the Woods level of indie hip hop. I mean, I think No Name is a bigger artist, so that's why I would think that he's probably more aware of her, and I would say that that's why I would say she's probably the biggest artist. But then Run the Jewels is probably even a better answer, to be honest. Run the Jewels is probably a better answer.
This is a much higher level game.
Yeah, he's talked about Woods. I don't think he listens to Woods, is what I'm saying.
Than Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance. This is showing a willingness to sacrifice larger appeals.
I mean, Timmy, what up? Talking about Infinity Knives and Brian Ennals isn't easy clicks either, so I don't think that's the game he's playing.
Success, possibly even careers, for intentional and uncompromised political ideology. It means maybe never getting what your talent could have earned you. The hip hop industry has pretty rigid parameters on just how provocative and counterculture you can get, while also being allowed to take a chunk out of the machine. For the longest, there have been multiple measures put in place to make sure that a group like Infinity Knives stays in a very specific spot. But every once in a while, especially back in the day, like with Public Enemy, someone slips through the cracks. And I want to briefly talk about my favorite group that ever somehow snuck into the mainstream while saying some of the realest, most provocative shit you've heard in hip hop probably since the early 2000s. Dead Prez and their first album, Let's Get Free, which celebrated its 25-year anniversary. 25 years. That album came out my senior year in high school, 25 years ago.
Yeah, I was a freshman in college.
In the year 2000, Dead Prez came out of nowhere with the classic album Let's Get Free.
Sophomore.
And I still can't believe that this thing exists, but I gotta come back and do a little bit of background. M1 and Stickman actually met at FAMU, where both got deep into leftist politics, particularly the Black Panther Party.
Thank you, Flux.
And it's hard
Hello, Flux.
for me to imagine like how they got into the real politics of the Black Panther Party at the time, with so much of who the Panthers were still being very, very much hidden behind cool aesthetics and aggressive imagery. To this day, the actual leftist politics of the Black Panther Party is pushed to the side. And back then, with movies like Panther or even like Forrest Gump, they were mostly just like this caricature of who they really were, and the politics of what they represented, the leftist, Marxist, Leninist politics that they followed, is mostly left out. But somehow, some way in the mid-90s, when all of this counterinsurgency would have been at its peak, Dead Prez managed to get a hold of it. And this led them to put this in their music eventually. And they were found in New York by Lord Jamar, of all people, who got them a deal with Loud Records, distributed through Columbia, which basically, I believe, is Sony Records. So as I get into some of the politics of the music, understand that this is all made with the backing of Sony Records. At the time, Loud Records was known for being the home of hardcore gangster rap, especially from New York. We're talking M.O.P., Big Pun, Wu-Tang Clan, Mobb Deep, and even some non-New York artists like 3 6 Mafia and Twista called the label home for a while. And my guess is that Lord Jamar and, like, you know, some other people just low-key snuck them in on
I had no idea Lord Jamar was a part of their story at all.
that same hardcore hip-hop energy, and people weren't fully paying attention to what they were saying because they had the full backing of the machine for their first classic album. They had articles written about them in a source, all the media exposure you might expect for a buzzworthy new rap duo at this time in hip-hop history. And I think part of this was because their sound was not as New York sounding as other NY rappers at the time, which is a big deal because in the mid 90s to like the early 2000s, the South had something to say. Artists from Atlanta and New Orleans and Memphis had taken the mantle of what commercial hip hop and street rap sounded like. And at the time, New York rappers were being essentially stubborn about maintaining the New York sound, which was falling out of popularity in hip hop as a whole. But likely as a byproduct of being at the notorious party school FAMU, M1 and Stickman probably learned to appreciate Southern sounds, and you hear it in their music. The first track, I'm an African, which is one of my all-time favorite songs, sounds closer to something from Master P or Juvenile than Wu-Tang Clan. Their biggest hit, Bigger Than Hip Hop, that's like the song, not, you should know what I'm talking about. This is a bass-heavy, trunk-rattling banger that sounds nothing like what other New Yorkers were doing at the time. But that's the surface-level stuff. Understand that you've heard me use that song, I'm an African, at least twice, both during the Black Panther video and the Hotep video, because it's a song about real Pan-Africanism. I'm not gonna do the full analysis of the entire album, and I'm sure that the analysis exists somewhere, but understand that the entire album gets into topics that were taboo even for hip hop. It's a truly revolutionary work. I remember being in high school and this being the first time I had ever heard a black person use the word socialist and identify as such in a positive manner. I remember going to college in the mornings where I wasn't feeling.
My main memory of that album when it came out, and it was in regular rotation with me and all my friend group, but I knew on campus a lot of people who were just, you know, young kids into mainstream hip hop that were exposed to that song. And I heard from a couple of them, they heard that album and they were mad. Like they felt like they got tricked. Like, and I guess it's because they weren't listening to the lyrics on Bigger Than Hip Hop. They didn't expect an album so filled with knowledge, and they just kind of wanted more beats like that. And that always, like, that was like one of those moments like where I learned about like the scope of what we are dealing with as hip hop artists. And I say we, even though I wasn't even in the game at that time, but like it was like one of those teachable moments, I guess, for me, of like, oh, what people are looking for, what people are expecting, and if you attract someone to a project based on making sure the music resonates in a certain way, there's a chance that people could be off-put by the message if the message doesn't jibe with what they're used to hearing. And that album had an impact far beyond that, but that was the part that I always felt was most interesting. That like I had heard from people out of their own mouths that they were like pissed off after having bought it.
You know, being in school, their song, They Schools, which is an anthem about how schools indoctrinate us, that was on heavy rotation. How this was being heavily promoted in mainstream hip hop media by Loud Records and by proxy Sony.
Friendly Times, do I feel like my music is political? Not, I wouldn't define it as such. I would define it as more personal. I wouldn't want it to define it as political because I think there's too many songs that don't have anything to do with that. And I wouldn't want to set that expectation for anybody. Where I feel like an artist like No Name or an artist like Killer Mike, like when you listen to them, you can expect to hear more of them talking about the ills of society outright and trying to paint the world that they want to see in that context. Like I'm just as likely to write a song about washing the dishes. So I don't know if you want to put me squarely in the political category.
They got the full album rollout treatment, and they were definitely pretty successful, cracking the top 100 hip hop list. The album was critically acclaimed. Dave Chappelle even used their music as the intro for his show for several years, but they also paid the price for slipping through the cracks and being that radical on their records. Loud Records went defunct and they got fully absorbed into Columbia and Sony, and troubles ensued. Their second album was shelved for 2 years, allowing their buzz to fizzle, and eventually
Well, Polly B, and I hate to keep interrupting him in the middle of his points, but I do agree that everything is political, but in that sense, almost every artist is political, unless you just outright reject it and it's all about, consumption and not thinking at all. I take the question of whether or not my music is political is whether or not I would categorize it with artists who I feel like that's their main intention. And it's not my main intention, even though I fully understand that me having the audacity to write a rap song about whatever the fuck I want to write about is political in and of itself.
it was released with minimal promotion. And in many ways, that was low-key the end of their relevance in the mainstream. They've managed to pop up here and there with other media projects, including a documentary on the Stars Network, but that was it. And this is why a lot of artists and even YouTubers will be very careful in how they engage with radical sentiment in their music and art, and why I will remain critical and even skeptical of some of my favorite rappers when they talk that game, because the reality is, to truly talk that game and play it means putting it all on the line, and then crossing that line. It's something I balance myself, and why you should be skeptical of me at all times. And that's why I have so much respect for those artists, those rappers and others who did see that line and break right through it, like a Dead Prez or Nina Simone or Infinity Knives. Hip hop is still a genre at the margins of radical thought. It's still capable of being incredibly provocative and challenges the system and the status quo, but we can only maintain that status by remembering the true extent of what truly challenges the system in our art and what that looks like, versus art that kind of plays into the same aesthetics but doesn't quite measure up to what the real radical art is putting on the line. So while I love those artists who do keep the culture and the energy alive, I have to pay my full respects to those who sacrifice their careers to make the real statement. I'm FD Signifier, and this has been Light Work.
All right. Excellent work from FD as usual. I think that there's a little bit of I think a lot of times we look at the history of hip hop with sort of rose-colored glasses, about how, I mean, it did used to be more political, but I think the reason for that, I feel like it was less artists sneaking through the door and more that I think when it comes down to it, these record labels are globalist corporations that really just want to make every music dollar they can. Like, if they think that there's enough people willing to spend money on music that's political, then they'll sell it. I don't think it matters to them. I don't think that they think that any music is powerful enough to stop what they're doing. I don't think they believe that. And, you know, these are the same labels that have been around through history, through, you know, countercultural music in the hippie era to you know, reggae music that was specifically calling for revolution. They didn't have any problem putting that stuff out. They didn't have no problem putting that stuff out. And I don't think they have any problem now. Like, I think, and I always go back to this, I think that the industry contracted a lot when it went away from physical media. And I just think that the budgets that these labels have to develop artists and promote artists is just a lot smaller than it used to be. So there's less of a reason for them to do anything except for what works the absolute best. And what works the absolute best is sort of mindless consumption music. Like, that's like just escapism music is what works the best. So, you know, I think, you know, a lot of the musicians that want to make something other than that are typically going to end up engaging in the industry in a way that's more independent. It's not going to be, you know, Atlantic Records isn't going to sign a political group. I don't think, because that to them probably doesn't seem like smart money. I don't think it's anything to do with whether or not they see the message as potentially hurting their business. I don't think that that's what they look at it as. What is mindless consumption music? Let me think of an example. I mean, part of the problem is I don't really like listen to a lot of it. I mean, maybe, yeah, I do think that's like the world Drake wants. And I think Drake was much more comfortable when he didn't have to say anything. He even said it on his last record. Like he feels like the world isn't gonna want music that people have to think about when they're in a strip club. He made that very clear, that he's gonna keep making, you know, basically music people can zone out to, because he doesn't feel that the world is gonna change just because Kendrick came through saying smart stuff. Yeah, Lil Pump. That's a perfect example. I think that's a perfect example. Like, Lil Pump isn't out here trying to challenge anybody to do anything. Lil Pump was just trying to make music to fucking vibe out to. A lot of the stuff they play when they're like going to commercial from a basketball game, you know, and sometimes I recognize that music and I'm like, oh, they used something I know, but usually it's something I don't know. It's something that sounds sort of expensive, generic, you know, and gets the foot tapping, but it's not done in any sort of memorable or challenging fashion, like not in a way that's trying to grab your ears and say, hey, check me out. It's more of a way to like just have some background music behind the highlight of the person getting dunked on before they go to the Charmin commercial, you know, like that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, you know, great video. Will hip hop ever be radical again was the question, and I think the answer is hip hop remains radical if you're looking for where the radical hip hop is. And I think that if you're looking for the radical hip hop to be in Target commercials, it's not going to be there. You know, if you're looking for, and again, Kendrick's success flies in the face of all of this. I totally understand. I am just, from my purview, you can call it cynicism, you can call it whatever you want to call it. I don't think that that's going to cause these big corporations to go and find more stuff that sounds like that. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think they looked at that as a moment in time. And they're going to keep spending the money how they've been spending it. You know? I think that's what's going to continue to happen. So I think radical hip hop will still be closer to the ground, underground. Like people were saying Bamboo in the chat earlier. I think he's the perfect example. He is amassing a fantastic fan base off of music that is incredibly challenging to political norms. And the fan base he's amassing is the fan base that wants that. And I don't think that, you know, Atlantic Records or Warner Records is going to come along and want to sign him no matter how good he's doing. I don't think so. And it's the thing, I would love to be wrong about that. I would love to be wrong about that. I would love for Bamboo to be as big as Rage Against the Machine was at one time. I would love that. And none of this stuff, as I'm saying, is about like trying to find examples of when stuff was in commercials. Like it's like, I'm not talking about what happens sometimes. I'm talking about what happens most of the time, because I feel like that's what's going to keep happening. Lexa Pro, and that is the question, right? Would Bamboo take it? Would he want that? I have no idea. You know, I don't know how much he wants to engage with the industry. Because I can imagine if you were in his position, if that deal comes across the table to you, you're not just thinking about the numbers on the paper. You're thinking about what it might cost you in terms of you being able to be the artist that you want to be. But I think that the fact that he would ask about it, that he would think about it, doesn't mean that he shouldn't ever get the opportunity, you know? No, I feel you, Amalgam. I understand, you know, I don't always make the most ethical choice. A lot of my mental resources stretch pretty thin. But this I'll tell you this slowly but surely, I will always improve. So one day it won't be Fiji water there, and it'll be because Amalgam said it enough times where I was at the store and I decided to do something different. You know, I certainly don't defend any less than ideal choice that I make. But I also don't claim to be the person who's making all the ideal choices all the time either. Like and subscribe, homie, friend. It's free. Stop playing.